Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation today. I would like to wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening for whatever time you are accessing this presentation. Our presentation today is going to be on engaging students in synchronous and asynchronous instruction by utilizing Zoom. I'd first like to introduce ourselves. My name is Professor Frank Petropolo. I'm an assistant professor in the Biology and Chemistry Department at the County College of Morris in Randolph, New Jersey. I'm joined today with Dr. Dina Restaino, who is also an assistant professor in the Biology and Chemistry Department at the County College of Morris in Randolph, New Jersey. Before we get started, I'd like to provide a brief overview on some things that we will be talking about today. This presentation will examine various procedures to connect and share the screen of an external device, such as an iPad, during a Zoom meeting. Examples of utilizing Zoom for synchronous and asynchronous activities and instruction will be provided during this presentation. These student-centered tactics include Q&A sessions, tutoring, Kahoot, remote and online instruction, and individual and group projects which help to aid in student success in our courses by engaging students in active learning environments. Being student-centered is very, very important in regards to providing an exceptional experience for students as they are attending college. And I really want to talk about Zoom first. Why would we use Zoom? And this is being tied back into being student-centered. One aspect of being student-centered is to really have students immersed within the learning process and have an active voice and an active role in their learning. Utilizing various teleconferencing software in the past, we finally settled on using Zoom because students really like to use this software, and through their feedback, they really rejected the other types. So we have also available to us WebEx, Shindig, and Microsoft Teams. And we've heard time and time again that there's less technical issues with Zoom. It's a very easy to use interface. It's easy to share screen. It's easy to connect devices. It's faster. And that's something I really like because I know using WebEx in the past, it was a little bit laggy. So these are all things that the students did provide feedback on, and we took that heavily into consideration when we were moving forward in regards to the teleconferencing software that we used. So first, let's look at the bullet point on top, tailor the learning experience with students in mind. One thing that you would want to do is be direct when making a presentation that you're going to share with students. You don't want to include unnecessary info. This is going to cause the students to get lost in the presentation, what's important, what's not important. And I know a majority of my students do download the PowerPoint to an electronic device such as an iPad. However, some still do print the presentation. So if you have a presentation that is extremely filled with text and pictures, they have their place, they're important, but if you can cut out those slides that are redundant and try and take an approach where the PowerPoint, say, is a little more summarized, that really does help students out in the long run. The other thing that we want to look at are the assignment and assessment breakdown in the course. You want to make sure that you really have a nice abundance of assessments. You don't want to just have 3 examinations in the course and that's it. So if you give students the opportunity to utilize a discussion board, a blog, or multiple of those assessments throughout the course, along with quizzes, maybe publisher resource assignments, and examinations, this will allow students who have different learning types to actually perform potentially in the assessment that they are going to be more well-rounded, I would say, to do well in. Also, in regards to the assessments, I try to also incorporate the students once again into completing the assessments. So I utilize what are called your choice blogs. So in my anatomy and physiology class, chapter 9, they can pick from 4 different topics. And I also put a note in there that if these topics don't work for you, you can always email me and let me know, and we can come up with another topic. Students really have been appreciating this because this allows them to, again, pick what topic they're going to be interested in and be able to explain the best. In regards to the assessments, you do want to make sure, again, that they are focused and that you just don't have busy work in there, because that does allow students to become overwhelmed and start losing interest in the actual topic. And then the last tactic that I like to utilize is, for extra credit, I have students write test questions, and I don't always incorporate those test questions into the examinations on that particular semester, but sometimes I do if it's a really good test question. So that is definitely something that students appreciate, and in my student opinion reports, I've received some feedback on that verbally as well, that students appreciate things like this. Moving down to motivate students, don't put them down. It is really not a good idea to come in on the first day of class and say to students, this is a really difficult class, half of you are going to be gone, half of you are going to fail by the end of the semester. That's not really what you want to do on the first day of class. You want to be the cheerleader for the students. You want to be understanding. You don't want to take that mentality of figure it out on your own. You want to provide an abundance of resources for students to use. Some will use all of them, some will use none of them, but at least as the instructor, you were able to provide them with ways to succeed in your course. Increased presence in the course. This is something I am really a firm believer on. Even in my online courses that I teach, Anatomy and Physiology 1 and Pathophysiology, students have told me that I am very, very attentive in regards to emails, discussion boards, blogs, because I really try to be there for the students. And the purpose of the instructor setting a very, very upfront social presence at the beginning of the course, that shows students that you really do care. Hopefully you're personalized and personable when you actually do share experiences. And this leading by example shows students how they need to be prompt even in an asynchronous course, and the level of detail that they need to provide. And the last thing that I would like to talk about on here is going to be the continuous change within the course. Your course documents, for example, they are never complete. I've had instructors in my past who wrote their course documents many, many years ago, and then there was a lot of information that was missing. So I'm constantly changing my course documents, not totally from scratch, but what I do is I take out what does not work and I add in what something maybe potentially needs more clarification for. So these are just things that you want to think about from semester to semester. In regards to technological changes, I don't believe in implementing some type of new technology in the middle of a semester. I try to do this at the beginning and run it for an entire semester. Sometimes you'll just have a class that does not like a technology, and it doesn't mean you should give up. You might want to give something a second chance in an additional semester. I have never in my educational career run into something that worked so badly that I had to pull it out mid-semester. So I always would say to somebody, especially teachers who are less experienced, don't pull something out mid-semester, because that could also be confusing for students. So right here we can see on this image what a Zoom screen would look like. Notice that it is muted down here. And you can also see that the camera is off, which is why you're looking at a black screen. But just a brief overview in case you're not familiar with Zoom. Down here where it says unmute, this is where you can mute or unmute. You can also pick which microphone you would like to use. Notice down here it says start video. This is where you can, again, either turn your video on or off, and you could figure out what camera you're going to use. Under security, you can lock the meeting. If it's something like an office hour and you're going to be talking about grades and you don't have a waiting room enabled, you could definitely use that. Under participants, you'll be able to see a list of all the participants in the Zoom meeting at this particular time. Typically, what I do tell students to do is make sure you have your first and last name as it would be displayed on my roster, so I can keep track, both not only in the Zoom meeting, but afterwards in the reports. Chat, you can have an ongoing conversation with students. Maybe they'll pose questions within the chat if they're afraid to unmute themselves and speak. You can also share files with students. We're going to focus on share screen on the next few slides, but this is where you can pick which window on your computer you would like to share. In addition to that, you might even be able to share, depending on your situation and your devices, the screen of an external device. Record. You can capture the screen of your computer, yourself, depending on if you have the camera on or off, your voice, and you can save that video to the cloud or to the computer itself. It's interesting when you save it to the computer, it typically will tell you at the end where it is saved to, but sometimes I've had to search for the files, so I do like to save to the cloud. Closed caption, this is going to depend on your school. Some schools will be paying for this service to be enabled. A lot of times an external company like Rev has to be involved in order for this to be utilized. So that's something you can look into additionally. Breakout rooms, this is great for group work where you can make a breakout room and list the students ahead of time, or you can do it on the fly. And then reactions, this is where you can go for thumbs up, thumbs down, emojis, so you can get reactions from students. Next, we're going to take a look at the share screen on a Mac, and I would like to zoom in on the left-hand picture. I utilize iPhone, iPad via AirPlay. Okay, this is a very easy way to connect, and I will show you coming up on the next screen how to do this. You can connect by cable as well, but that makes it a little more cumbersome. And then if we zoom in on the right-hand side, notice it is making sure that both devices are going to be connected to the same network. If you don't have both devices, meaning your laptop, if you have a MacBook, and your iPad connected to the same network, this will not work. You can utilize a PC with an iPad or a PC with another Android-based tablet. You do have, though, the iPhone and iPad icon in here so that you can click on this. Just like with the Mac devices, you do need to make sure that you are going to be on the same network with both devices for this to function correctly. Once you select that on Zoom, you can move over to your iPad, and then you're going to, where the battery, Wi-Fi logo are, you're going to swipe down from a lock screen or even an open screen, and you're going to click on this little icon right here. This is the screen mirroring icon. I do want to point out that in the past, it was actually located here. These have flipped on the current iOS. Okay, so I do have the most up-to-date iOS on my iPad Pro. Once you click on this button right here, we can move over to the right-hand side. It gives you a list of all the devices in the proximity to connect to. So if I had my MacBook Air and my MacBook Pro, it would have both of them listed here, and you can just select which one of the two you want to connect to. So the first thing that I would like to talk about in regards to applying the use of Zoom is going to be online format modality. Online course format modality is going to be asynchronous instruction. This is going to be where the videos are posted and the students can watch these videos as long as they are completing the work within the time frame designated on the course calendar. So it doesn't matter if I post everything on Sunday and a student gets through the whole chapter, they work on it a little bit each day, or they wait until, say, Saturday and they work on the chapter that day, the last day of the academic week. So that's really going to be up to students. But you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here, I just have a screenshot of some of the items within my Chapter 1 learning module for A&P 1. So we have Introduction to Chapter 1, Anatomy versus Physiology, Structure versus Function. I get all the videos completed, and because I've been teaching the class for a while, they're all done, and I just roll them over each semester prior to the start of the semester. So everything's set up and accessible on the first day. And really, students can work on most of the class ahead of time, but I don't change the dates of assessments. So the exams, not to rush anybody, they stay when they are, and students have a week to take them. What are some of the downfalls of this asynchronous instruction? I would say students have to really be motivated, they have to be self-starters, they have to hold themselves accountable, and they really have to reach out and initiate help. It's difficult sometimes for an online instructor to really see when a student is struggling. And a lot of times I don't know that a student is struggling until after the semester when I'm actually going to be reading my student opinion reports, and they'll say that I struggled, and you don't know who that student actually was, but it would have been nice during the semester if they came to me and they utilized office hours, tutoring center hours, and a lot of the other services that I'm going to talk about a little bit later within this PowerPoint.
So as we just talked about, using Zoom or any asynchronous presentation mode for online courses requires a lot of upfront work and planning. But we can also use Zoom in order to do oral presentations and increase interaction amongst students. So just a couple things that we want to make sure we're doing as we're setting this up for students is we want to make sure that we have very clear directions. So we want to make sure that upfront our students know we're going to be using this technology so that they have the ability to reach out if they're confused. Directions should be really clear for the students. And by setting all of this up in advance, it allows you to use a lot of other features that are incorporated in your learning management system along with Zoom. So in my courses, I incorporate things like the group workspace and discussion boards. And this makes it a little bit more like a face-to-face or a traditional class, and still allows the students to have the interaction and opportunity to present as they would in a regular classroom. We can also have the students do things like evaluate each other's in a group or things like that. So we can really closely mimic exactly what we're doing in the classroom by using Zoom and our learning management system. So the first type of presentation that I want to talk about using Zoom is going to be a group presentation. And a lot of people feel that you can't effectively do a group presentation in an asynchronous or remote environment. And that's really not the case. So the first thing to start out with when you're trying to do this is to get students into groups. So if we look right here, one of the things that I do is I have students rank preset topics. And just like we saw when we were talking about the Your Choice blogs, right? This allows students to pick topics that they're interested in. So I have students fill out this document and they just rank their choices 1 through 5. So what are they the most interested in? And then I take this information and I randomly put students into groups. And this randomization really helps increase interaction among students, right? We all know that students tend to sit with their friends if they're in a face-to-face class and they want to work with their friends. But this is a great opportunity to get students to engage with each other and meet other people that they wouldn't normally work with. So I really like this system. And again, it requires work up front. You have to have the document set up. Students have to fill it out in advance, but you get a lot of return on it. It really works to increase engagement and get students working. After the students create or fill out this document, I then put them into a group workspace, which is over here. And one of the things that you need to do is when you start your online course, you should do an orientation that explains what each of these tabs on your learning management system encompass. So they know what is found in each one and what to look for. So when I put students into their groups, I give them a group workspace where they can interact with each other. And this is just the initial way that they can find out who's in their group and how they can get in contact with each other. This also allows you as the instructor to monitor these initial contact and exchange of information so that you know students are working with each other. So allowing the students to sort of rank their groups or their opinions about them and then putting them into a group workspace works really, really well for increasing engagement and getting the students to interact. So The next thing is how do they actually get that presentation to work? So most students are really familiar with Zoom, at least at this point, because we've been using Zoom for a very long time throughout the pandemic. But what students are used to is joining meetings that are set up by the college or by their professor. So they're great at interacting with the program from that point, but they're not so familiar with actually creating meetings and sending out invites. So what I do is I have a document that explains how you schedule a meeting, how you give that information out to your group members so that everybody is on the same page. Again, a little bit of upfront work, but it makes it work really well in the long run. So on the right, what we can see is sort of just a screenshot from students that gave a presentation. So one of the benefits of using Zoom is that students can have their PowerPoint presentation in the background, and then they can also have the little video of their faces, just like they would be presenting to the class in a face-to-face environment. So again, this really closely mimics what we would have students do in person, but instead they're doing it in a remote setting. One of the things that I have students do to sort of engage further is use discussion boards. So normally at the end of a presentation, students in the class would raise their hand and ask questions of the presenter. But you sort of lose that engagement and interaction when you are asynchronous and it's just a recording. But you can have students ask questions in the discussion board where the presenters would then later go back and answer them. So I utilize this to, again, increase engagement, get students to reflect on their presentation, and have students make sure that they're watching and that they are engaged with what is being presented. So what you see on the screen is over here, right? These are just the presentation discussion boards. And you can see that there's posts in each. And then down here on the bottom, right, this is where you would ask questions. So students go into the discussion board, ask their questions of the presenter, and then as the instructor, you can sort of quietly monitor this and make sure that students are participating and that they're responding to questions that are being asked. It also gives you the ability to sort of gently correct a student if they present information that is incorrect. That was how we use Zoom for group presentations. But we can also use Zoom for individual presentations. Obviously, you don't need to set up any groups for this. So what I do for my students is I just have them pick a topic that they are interested in, and then they sort of let me know. I provide them with feedback. They get the same instructions on how to use Zoom for the recording. And then they publish their videos to the discussion board again. And then students are able to interact and ask questions. So if we look at this slide, we can see that there was 105 interactions with the oral presentation discussion board. That includes video presentations and the questions and responses from students. So if you notice, right, there was very few participants in this class. Right? 18, but there was over 100 interactions. And that's because the students were told ahead of time that they had to watch these videos of their classmates and they had to come up with a thoughtful question and then respond to that question. So this really works well if your expectations are clear and they're set out ahead of time. And you can use these presentations again for group and individuals.
So let's switch from asynchronous instruction to synchronous instruction. And remote course format took place during our fall 2021 semester. What happened was, due to the uptick again in the COVID-19 pandemic, the school decided that the first 7 weeks of the semester approximately would be remote in modality so that students can get vaccinated, etc., fill out the required paperwork. So remote course format is different than asynchronous because students are going to be either at home or on campus in a safe location, and they are just not in a classroom, but they are held more accountable, say, than asynchronous online instruction because they are required to sign up at a specific time. Students need their camera on, they need to be present, they need to be actively participating in the class, which means taking notes, being ready to be called on, asking questions to the instructor. And the other nice thing is that because it is a live session, the instructor can have verbal reminders about upcoming events. So, for example, your lecture exam is coming up in 2 classes, which is in a week. This is very helpful. Students really do benefit from this more scheduled, I would say, type of instruction. A lot of students did not want to have their face-to-face classes switch to this remote course format. However, when we returned to campus, they were almost a little bit disappointed. They really did like this remote course format because they were at home, they were on campus, but they weren't stuck in a classroom. And to some degree, that was beneficial to them. I also had recorded our sessions and provided the recordings, so students are now missing that. I'm getting a lot of questions this semester where we don't have this remote course format, and students are saying, can you record? The problem is with my iPad, when I have it plugged into the projector, I can't mirror the screen to my MacBook and record it on Zoom. So that is a limitation, unfortunately, of the Apple devices. But that is one thing that I noticed students do miss, and I think they definitely saw the benefits of this remote course format. Participation and attendance was excellent. Almost every class for the 7 weeks, and I'm talking my different classes that I was teaching, attendance was almost 100% each time, so that was very nice. Zooming down towards the bottom, you can see a screenshot. This is GoodNotes 5 on my iPad Pro. I use my Apple Pencil, and I am able to highlight, I'm able to annotate, and students really do appreciate this. I noticed that a lot of students have actually been using this now in my class with an iPad. They come up and ask me, what do I use? And they're happy with it as well. You can see up here the top bar. It has the electronic pen. It has the eraser. It has the highlighter. You could put in shapes. You can circle things and move them. You can insert pictures. I'm using the laser pointer right now. There's different colors. If you clicked on this little bubble, you can pull up a color palette. You can change the size of the line if you were using the writing implement. This is very, very helpful. And like I said, I'm using this right now to do my presentation. Almost all presentations that I do now will utilize this software. Then if we move over here, this is what students would see when I am capturing the screen on Zoom using AirPlay. Some other types of synchronous instruction that can be utilized through Zoom are going to be office hours. I set these up as recurring meetings and put the links, say, from my Monday and Wednesday office hours right in my instructor's addendums. Students have it the first day. Technically, I email to them before the semester even begins, but they have it by the first day so they can come. They're drop-in office hours, but having that standardized link in there is really beneficial for the students because it allows them to know from day one where you're going to be and when you're going to be there. So in office hours, you can answer questions, whether it's about material, whether it's about the course. You can provide advice to students. You can do or assist students with advising questions, and just general feedback can be sent to students. Tutoring is also very important at our institution. I am the Tutoring Center Science Liaison, and I coordinate the schedules for all our full-time and part-time faculty who want to tutor. It's excellent because all of our full-time faculty are actually tutors as well in the Tutoring Center. And there's 3 types of sessions that fall under the Tutoring Center. 2 categories and then 3 sessions to be exact. So first you have one-on-one tutoring. This is going to be where a student can make an appointment with a faculty or a peer tutor. This is going to be 3 sessions per subject per week, 2 of the 20-minute sessions can be, or 25-minute sessions can be back-to-back on the same day. The third has to be on a different day, but that's 3 sessions per subject per week. So that's really nice for students, and they really do utilize that extensively at our college. In a one-on-one session, they can just ask questions, follow up for an exam. Next, we're going to move into group sessions, and there's 2 types of group sessions, which would be the second and third type of tutoring options. Workshops are going to be offered. These are offered virtually for the past few semesters. These typically focus on skills, for example, study skills. Another one that we offer for chemistry, because we are the bio and chemistry department, one on stoichiometry, one on dimensional analysis. So they're typically a specific skill set that we know students are currently lacking in. And the third type of tutoring are going to be focus sessions. These are run by the full-time anatomy and physiology instructors, and that's actually what you see on the screenshot in the center of the screen right here. These are targeted sessions for topics that we know students struggle with. And there's about 8 for A&P1, 8 for A&P2 each semester. And you can see on the right-hand side, this is going to be the integration of the peripheral and central nervous systems. So there's a lot going on in there. You can see I tried to color code things, write them in different areas. And the main point for these focus sessions is to really go over the topics that we know are difficult, but even more so to allow students to see how we as faculty would categorize this information. That's where the students are struggling a lot. It's not necessarily that they don't get the info, they don't know how to categorize it to effectively learn the material for the examination. The last type of synchronous support that we offer are Q&A sessions. These are question and answer sessions. Students are supposed to come to these sessions prepared, meaning that they're not coming saying, teach me everything. These are for students to come and say, can you go over figure 18.13? I really don't get that. Can you talk more about cellular respiration, specifically the Krebs cycle? I don't get that. That's fine to be general in a sense, but at least they are coming with a particular topic or a particular figure that they need for us to explain once again. This allows for a lot of collaboration. I like when a student in the session is able to answer another student's question. That shows that when you can effectively explain the material, it really is beneficial and helps you study as a student if you're able to do that. But that collaboration is something that sometimes, say in an online class I use Q&A, that would otherwise be lacking because it's an online class. This allows students to not feel as siloed as they normally would be. You can also use this for case studies, application materials. You can use Q&A sessions for labs if there was a dissection, say, that you wanted to show to the class or provide further clarification, simulations. And the point is that it is not just the instructor talking for the entire period. Next, we have Next, we have Kahoot that can be utilized on Zoom. Kahoot is a game-based software that is utilized to review material in the class. It can be used for both formative and summative assessments. There's true and false questions, there's quiz questions, there's puzzle. I pay for this service, so I have one of the higher tier accounts, so I do have a lot of the features that are unlocked. You can pull questions that are already pre-written, like if I typed in the skeletal system, there's a library of questions, or you can make your own. There's also a library of pictures if you have the paid accounts, which is very nice. On the left-hand side, this is me sharing my screen from my iPad onto my MacBook and mirroring this through Zoom to the students. On the right-hand side, this is just me capturing the entire computer screen, again, through Zoom. So you can either use the iPad or just use the computer directly on here. This is a great software. I use it very often in all course modalities, and a lot of times if I use it and then just get busy in the course, there's not enough time to implement this, which happens very rarely. I try to use this regularly. I'll actually have students saying, we kind of miss the Kahoots. When are we doing this again? So something to think about. They like fun stuff like this. It allows, again, for collaboration and a little bit of friendly competition. I've never seen it get to be where it's like a cutthroat competition and it gets really bad in class. Now, it's a nice, friendly competition. They're all trying to answer the question first correct and as quickly as possible to get the most points possible. What are some of the ways that I use this? I use this to recall information from the last class at the beginning of the next class. That's an example of summative assessment. I can use it to gauge understanding of the topic that I just covered. For example, if I do muscle contraction, that's a tough concept sometimes to grasp. So I can ask 4 or 5 questions to see if students really did understand that topic. That's an example of formative assessment. You can also use this for major reviews at the end of, say, a unit coming up to a lab practical exam. I've used this before with 50 to 75 questions to see how students did over a 4 lab span, now not just at the end of class. The last thing that I want to talk about on here is a newer feature or something that I have been using more recently. It's been there all along. It's called a challenge, and I can provide the students with a link through email, and they can just play the computer and see how well they can answer the same questions that they did in class. And a lot of times this is something, again, students actually do ask for.
So we just talked about all of the great things that you can do with Zoom, but that doesn't sort of put to light that there are some inequities that exist. So students overall have accessibility concerns, and we learned this over the pandemic that sometimes it's not necessarily having the knowledge to connect or having the device. Some students literally don't have good Wi-Fi, or they don't have a device that has a working camera. So we have to sort of make sure that students have all of these accessibility issues addressed. Also, we can sort of add closed captioning on Zoom. Not all schools have this enabled, but remember, some students really need these closed captions, so you really need to add them. And in some cases, you might have to partner with another company like Rev that will add the captioning in. There's also specific guidelines that are set out with how many characters you can have and things like that. So that's just something to pay attention to. So Zoom does a good job of putting sort of automated captions in, but you have to check them because especially with jargon particular to your discipline, sometimes it can come up with some things that are really funky and it can disrupt students. So you just have to make sure that captioning is accurate and works. Another thing is some students, especially those coming out from K-12, they're used to using other things like Google Meet or Microsoft Teams. So they might not be as familiar with Zoom. And that's where those directions really, really are going to help the students. Now, the other thing is that students have expressed that they're really zoomed out. They've had an excess of virtual meetings. They're tired of meeting this way. So one of the things that you can do is you can limit meetings, right? Have pre-done recordings. You can limit the meetings or the times that students have to meet synchronously, if at all. This helps them sort of space out their time and still be engaged. The other thing is you can keep meetings short or even their presentations. Instead of having a student do a 30-minute presentation, have them do a 10 or 12-minute presentation. So just limiting the time that they're forced to interact with this technology can still keep them interested in it in the long term. So again, we can't assume that our students are going to know how to do everything. We know that most students are actually pretty good with technology, but it's not necessarily the technology that they need. So some of the things that we can do, again, provide directions for the software. We can be flexible. So we found, at least at our institution, that students really prefer to use Zoom, but that might not be across the board for other institutions. So be flexible. If students want to use a different technology, be open to that. Maybe they're more familiar with it or it's more accessible to their needs. We can also make sure that this technology is available free of charge. So we know that our institution provides Zoom, so we like to utilize that. Don't ask students to create or buy an account for something when there's a free version that's available to them. Also, if students don't have the technology, they don't have a camera on their computer, or their computer doesn't record audio well, institutions can usually lend out that equipment to students, and that can really help them. And it also gives them access and makes them feel just like every other student that's participating. So it's really important to make sure that if students do have a technology need or question, that they're comfortable coming to you and asking so that you can help them make sure that everything is equitable. Also, we have to recognize that not everywhere is set up for Zoom, right? So asking students to have something done at a specific time of day or day of the week might not work for them, right? Also, some students might not want to share what their living situation is like. So you should give your students directions for setting up a virtual background or to blur their background so that all you can see is their person, right? We should be understanding if a student needs to turn their camera off. Maybe there's something they're just really not comfortable, showing the rest of the class. So we should be cognizant of that and willing to work with students. The other thing is, if a student wants to record, they don't want to use a virtual background, but they don't have a place to do that, maybe housing is a concern, try and work with the student. See if you can set them up in a classroom or in a study room in the library so that they still have the same opportunities as all other students.
Mixing synchronous and asynchronous instruction definitely is something that is beneficial to students and can definitely be helpful. We felt that a blended instruction really is going to be the best thing for our students. This is going to allow I would say, benefits of each to really come out. So for a face-to-face class, whether it's a hybrid class, whether it's an online asynchronous modality, offering things outside of the classroom, all of the support services, office hours, tutoring center hours, those group events in the tutoring center, these are all going to not only support the student and increase their knowledge, allow them to do better overall, this is going to allow them to connect on a different level where maybe they wouldn't be able to, because we know that students don't always like to speak in front of other students inside a classroom. They might not ask you a question that they would if they were behind a screen. And I've had students now for the past few years due to COVID being online, and I did teach online prior to COVID. I've had students that got to know each other very, very well over Zoom, and even not one meeting in the class setting, if they opened a Zoom meeting up on their own and got to know each other like that. And I've heard from them, a semester or two down the road, and they took another class together, whether it was face-to-face or it remained online or it remained hybrid. So it's very important to increase student engagement any way that you can in a course, and that access to support really is beneficial and something that I always get complimented on in my classes. It's going to be the end of our presentation. We would like to thank you so much for your time today, for watching our presentation. You can pause this at this point, take a picture of the screen. The hyperlinks for our email addresses are there, and if you have any types of questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them. And again, thank you for attending today.